Hey friends, tonight we're stepping back in time, not into marble palaces or grand battlefields, but into a far smaller, dimly lit corner of history. A corner that is surprisingly well documented and just as surprisingly misunderstood. The daily life of Roman prostitutes. Before we get comfortable, take a breath with me. If you enjoy what I do here, feel free to subscribe, but only if it feels right. This is meant to be a gentle space, a place where history can feel like a soft blanket rather than a heavy book. And if you're listening from across the ocean or just a few streets away, let me know in the comments where you are and what time of night it is for you. I always find it magical, imagining these stories connecting us all under the same wide sky. Now dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, or picture the steady crackle of a fireplace. Allow your body to sink into stillness, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You wake up, or perhaps more truthfully, you drift back to consciousness, in a space barely large enough to stretch your legs. The walls are close, pressing in. There's no window, no sunlight spilling across the floor, only the faint flicker of an oil lamp, if it hasn't been stolen in the night. Congratulations! You live in a cellar, or in one of Rome's infamous lupanars, the brothels tucked above taverns or beside bathhouses. This is your studio apartment. If a studio were designed by someone who disliked air, privacy, and comfort all at once, the straw mattress beneath you is lumpy, carrying the sour smell of wine and smoke, perhaps even a few unwelcome fleas. In one corner, your worldly possessions, a small pot of rouge, a cracked comb, maybe a bronze mirror if fortune has been kind. No running water, no plumbing, only a bucket that you try not to think too hard about. And yet, this cramped, airless space is not just a home. It is a workplace. It is where countless women, often forgotten in history's grand tales, carve out their existence in the bustling heart of ancient Rome. But tonight, we are not rushing to judgment, nor painting in harsh colors. Instead, we'll walk quietly into their world, step by step, breath by breath, to understand what life might have felt like in those narrow rooms and noisy streets. Along the way, we'll wander into other corners of history too. The darkest year humanity ever endured, the soaring rise of Gothic cathedrals, the fall of Acre, and the hidden life of Rome's most powerful woman. So let's begin. Settle in, breathe deeply, and allow the echoes of the past to weave gently around you. Roman prostitutes. The room is still heavy with the smell of smoke and sour wine when you stir. Your eyes blink open slowly, as though even they are reluctant to face another day. The straw mattress beneath you rustles, and for a moment you're not sure if you're awake or still half lost in some strange dream. But no, this is your life. A small, windowless chamber in the heart of Rome, tucked above a tavern that never seems to sleep. This is not a palace. It is not even a proper home. It is what the Romans called a cella meretricia, a working room, small enough to touch both walls if you stretch out your arms. For many women in your position, this is where mornings begin and where nights end, with hardly any difference between the two. Morning in the brothel. The first light of day does not arrive with a golden sunrise. Not here, not in this little room. Instead, it seeps in faintly, indirectly, a pale suggestion of morning carried through cracks in the door or muffled footsteps echoing in the tavern below. Rome may be waking in grandeur, but in this narrow cell, morning is more a matter of habit than a hope. You shift on your mattress, a sack of straw, flattened by nights of restless sleep. It crunches faintly beneath your weight, a reminder of its age and of the fleas that sometimes share it with you. Your eyes adjust slowly. There are no windows here, no fresh air, no view of the forum of the temples, no glimpse of the sun climbing over tiled rooftops. For you, morning is a smell before it is a sight. The mingled scent of smoke from last night's torches, sour wine spilled on the tavern floor, and a faint tang of sweat that never fully leaves the air. The room itself is hardly larger than a pantry. A man could stretch out his arms and nearly brush both walls. In one corner sits a chipped clay pot, in another a little bundle of what passes for your belongings, a bronze comb, bent at one tooth, a smear of rouge in a cracked container, and if fortune has been kind this week, a bit of coal to darken your eyes. Perhaps you own a mirror, not the bright, glassy kind that would hang in the homes of the wealthy, but a disc of bronze, polished until it reflects only shadows and outlines. When you peer into it, you see not just your face, but also the distortions of your station. Before the city stirs too loudly, you begin your ritual. It is not luxury, but it is survival. You smooth your hair with the comb, wincing at the tangles pulled free. You press color to your lips, not because it makes you feel beautiful, but because it makes you look prepared. Presentation is part of the work, just as much as the space itself. The Romans knew this, and so did you. Here is a detail that history rarely softens. Prostitution in ancient Rome was not hidden. It was not whispered of only in shadows. It was, in fact, regulated. Women declared their profession, registered their names, and lived openly under the label meretrix. You were not respectable, no matter how careful you were with your appearance, but you were necessary. Rome saw to that. Brothels or lupanaria were scattered across the city, some modest like this one above a tavern, others larger, purpose-built, with walls decorated by frescoes that advertise the acts within. Outside, Rome itself is rising. You hear the first calls of vendors in the street. Bread, warm bread. A cart rattles by, its wooden wheels striking the cobblestones unevenly. From a distance comes the sound of hammers on bronze, the rhythm of the smithy starting its day. The subura, the working-class quarter, never truly sleeps, but mornings bring a sharper edge of activity. Children call to one another, women carry water jars balanced on their heads, and men hurry to their stalls in the market. For a moment, you allow yourself to imagine being among them, buying olives, haggling over cloth, drawing water at the fountain. Ordinary lives, ordinary tasks. But imagination is a dangerous indulgence. You are not a wife, not a matron, not the mother of respectable children. You are marked, both by your registration and by the glances of those who pass you. Respectable Roman women wear Stolian veils. You wear what your trade demands. The line between you and them is not a physical barrier, but it is as firm as stone. And yet, within this little chamber, you are not without control. You decide how to present yourself. You decide which smile to offer, which silence to hold. You arrange your tunic, check the bronze mirror one last time, and listen to the tavern stirring below. Soon, footsteps will climb the stairs. Soon, coins will change hands. But for now, you savor the last quiet minutes of morning, the fragile pause before the day begins. The tools of your life are humble, yet they carry weight. The rouge is not just pigment. It is armor. The comb is not just for hair. It is order in a place designed for disorder. Even the oil lamp, if it hasn't been stolen in the night, is more than light. It is companionship, a flicker against the overwhelming dark. This, then, is morning in a Roman brothel. Not glorious, not tragic, but steady, a rhythm of survival lived out in narrow rooms, repeated day after day, year after year. And while historians might reduce it to numbers in a census or names on a list, the reality is more fragile, more human. It is a woman sitting on a straw mattress, combing her hair in the half-dark, hearing Rome rise around her, and preparing herself to meet the world again. Because morning, even here, is not just the start of another day. It is proof that you endured the night. And sometimes, in the ancient city of Rome, that was triumph enough. The flow of customers. If morning is about preparing yourself, arranging hair, smoothing fabric, readying a small mirror and lamp, then midday and afternoon belong almost entirely to the steady tide of visitors. This is the rhythm that defines your life. The flow of customers, like the ebb and surge of the Tiber itself. Some men arrive with haste. Their sandals slap against the stone corridor, their breathing already quickened, as though every moment spent outside your door is wasted. They toss their coin without much thought, seeking only a brief escape from the demands of work or war. For them, the encounter is short, mechanical. You hardly remember their faces. They come and go like shadows at noon. Others arrive slowly, lingering in the doorway, as if undecided whether to step inside at all. They are cautious men, young soldiers just given their first pay, or older merchants burdened with the weight of reputation. Some have never been here before, and their eyes wander nervously over the cracked plaster and narrow bed. You welcome them softly, easing them into the space. For a few minutes, You become not just a body but a comfort, a reassurance that desire is neither shameful nor forbidden here. Then there are the regulars. They know you and you know them. Their steps are familiar. You can recognize the sound of their boots on the stair before you even see their faces. Perhaps it's a baker who slips away during the hot hours while his oven's cool, or a sailor whose ship docks at Ostia every few weeks. These men bring with them a strange kind of stability. They do not belong to you, not truly, but in their return you find a rhythm, a reminder that the wheel of life in Rome turns not only with chaos but with pattern. The brothel itself organizes this flow. At the entrance, paintings or carved signs advertise what lies within, erotic frescoes, figures frozen in colorful poses. They are not for beauty alone. They function as a menu of sorts, guiding visitors even before they step inside. Archaeologists in Pompeii found such images still on the walls, each room depicted with a different scene, letting the customer know what to expect. Imagine, centuries later, the walls still whisper transactions that once filled them. As men enter, the Leno or madam takes her share. Coins clink into her box, marked carefully. Every customer is counted, every payment recorded in her memory, if not on a tablet. She is the unseen current beneath the flow, ensuring it never dries up, ensuring that each of you remains available when needed. The men themselves are a cross-section of Rome. You might see a legionary with dust still on his cloak, his pay heavy in his purse. He boasts of battles, though whether he speaks truth or exaggeration you cannot know. Another may be a freedman, proud of the liberty he purchased, eager to prove his worth by spending freely. Then comes a senator's slave, sent not for himself but on behalf of his master, a reminder that even power moves through hidden channels. Each one carries the city with him, its struggles, its ambitions, its noise. And as they pass through your small room, you collect fragments of their lives. A soldier tells you Germania, where the forests are endless and dark. A sailor describes strange islands far across the sea. A craftsman complains about grain prices, about taxes, about corrupt officials. These conversations are fleeting, but they thread together into a tapestry. Through them, you know Rome not as a grand empire, but as voices, stories, complaints, and boasts that pass through your chamber day after day. Not all customers are easy. Some arrive angry, drunk, or rough. You learn quickly to read their gestures, to calculate what might soften their mood, or, if not, how to endure until they leave. This is part of the flow as well. The darker current beneath the surface. It is the unspoken knowledge every woman here carries, that the body is both your livelihood and your shield. Yet even within this relentless cycle, there are moments of pause. When the hallway grows quiet, when no footsteps echo on the stairs, you sit on the edge of the straw mattress and listen. From the street outside, the clamor of Rome seeps in. Vendors shouting, cartwheels grinding, children laughing in some distant courtyard. These sounds remind you that the city does not revolve only around these walls. Life continues beyond them, vast and unstoppable. The flow of customers resumes, soon enough. Always it resumes. Like the river, like the markets, like the turning of day into night. Some encounters are forgettable, dissolving into routine. Others stay with you, lingering in the mind long after the man has gone. And so the hours stretch, one visitor to the next, until the rhythm itself becomes the story of your day. For those outside the brothel, Rome is defined by temples, forums, and triumphal arches. For you, it is defined by footsteps in the corridor, by coins pressed into a keeper's hand, by the steady tide of strangers whose lives brush against yours for a fleeting moment before receding again. That is a flow of customers, endless, varied, impersonal yet intimate, shaping the very fabric of your existence in the heart of the ancient city. The reality of survival. By now, you may have noticed that life in a Roman brothel is not gilded with romance or freedom. It is, at its core, a daily negotiation with survival. Behind the painted frescoes and the steady shuffle of customers lies a truth that is both simple and heavy. The work is not about pleasure. It is about staying alive. Most women here did not wake up one morning and choose this life. Many were slaves, purchased at markets that sold people as casually as livestock. Others were debtors, forced into prostitution by circumstance when their families could no longer provide food or shelter. A few were freeborn, yes, but they often entered the trade out of desperation rather than desire. In Rome, survival was a constant calculation, and for women without property or protection, the options were few. Coins, small, ordinary, worn by countless hands, became the difference between hunger and a loaf of bread, between having a roof or sleeping in the street. Each visitor who passed through your narrow room left behind more than a memory. He left behind a payment that could mean your next meal, your next pair of sandals, perhaps even a way to send a little to family if you had any left to claim you. But those coins did not flow freely to you. The Leno, the keeper of the brothel, took a cut, rent for the room, fees for lamp oil, sometimes even a portion of what you earned directly. Survival meant not only enduring the labor itself, but navigating the system that profited from it. You lived always on the edge of enough, balancing between exhaustion and the relentless need to keep going. Health was another constant shadow. There were no doctors on call for women like you. If you fell ill, whether from fever, infection, or the wear of constant work, you had little recourse. Herbal remedies might be shared between women in the brothel, a mixture of wine, honey, or herbs pressed into service as medicine, but most of these were acts of hope rather than cures. And so, survival was not just about earning coins. It was about enduring sickness long enough to keep earning them. There was also the weight of reputation. In Roman society, prostitutes were marked, not physically branded, though slaves sometimes were, but socially separated. You could not testify in court. You could not marry into respectable families. The law itself categorized you as infamous, someone without honor, and this status followed you even if you left the trade. Imagine carrying not only the hardship of daily work, but the knowledge that the wider world saw you as less than human. Survival meant accepting this shadow, or at least learning to live with its constant presence. And yet, within these constraints, small sparks of humanity endured. Women in the same brothel often formed bonds, quiet alliances of survival. One might share a comb, another pass along leftover bread. A whispered warning about a violent client could mean the difference between danger and safety. These moments of care, small though they were, became lifelines. Survival was not only about enduring the men who came and went, but about finding solidarity in the women who remained. There were also glimmers of control. A regular client might treat you with a certain gentleness, or at least consistency. Some women learned to cultivate these relationships, building a fragile kind of patronage that offered better odds of survival. Others used wit, charm, or careful observation to manage difficult men, turning what could be a moment of violence into one of uneasy peace. These were skills as real as weaving or farming, the crafts of survival in a world that offered little mercy. Perhaps the hardest truth is that survival rarely looked like hope. Few women escaped this life. The brothel was designed to hold you, to profit from you, and society had little interest in letting you walk away. And yet, each morning you rose, straightened your dress, lit the lamp, and prepared again. That act alone, choosing to face another day, another flow of strangers, was itself a quiet form of resilience. For modern ears, it is tempting to ask why, or to imagine different paths. But in ancient Rome, survival often narrowed the world to a single truth. You did what you must to see another sunrise. That is what the brothel truly was. Not a house of pleasure, but a house of endurance, where every transaction, every coin, every breath was part of fragile balance that kept life moving forward. And so, the reality of survival is not only the work itself, it is the weight of hunger, the bite of illness, the sting of stigma, and the constant awareness that tomorrow depends on what you endure today. In that sense, the women of Rome were not merely figures in shadows. They were survivors, navigating the harsh mathematics of existence in one of history's most celebrated cities, between work and rest. By the time evening shadows stretched long across the streets of Rome, the brothel does not simply fall silent. It shifts into a different rhythm. The busiest hours have passed. The steady flow of customers has slowed. And for the women who work here, there is a fragile space between labor and rest. It is not quite freedom, but it is not quite work either. Something in between, a pause within an endless cycle. The rooms, lit earlier by the flicker of oil lamps, grow dim. The air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the faint sweetness of wine spilled on the floor. A woman steps out into the narrow hallway, hair loosened from its careful styling, the rouge on her cheeks long faded. She breathes in, shoulders heavy, and for a moment she allows herself to feel tired. Survival all day has demanded performance. Smiles, laughter, gestures rehearsed with men who pass through. But in this twilight hour, the mask slips. Some gather in corners of the brothel to share a meal. Whatever scraps have been saved. Bread, olives, maybe a wedge of cheese if fortune has been kind. Eating together is not just about filling the stomach. It is a way of reclaiming a sliver of humanity. The women talk softly, sometimes in whispers, sometimes with small bursts of laughter. A story about a clumsy client, a memory from childhood, a dream, half believed, about one day owning a stall in the marketplace instead of working here. These conversations are fragile, but they matter. They remind each woman that she is more than her role, more than the label the city has pressed upon her. Others retreat into solitude in their rooms. They tidy the small space, wash their hands and faces with basin cold water, or simply lie back against the hard bedding and close their eyes. Even if sleep does not come quickly, the act of lying still is its own kind of resistance. Rest is precious because it is rare. For many, it is interrupted by the Leno, by late-night customers, by the noise of the street. Still, these quiet minutes are claimed fiercely, like stolen treasure. This in-between time is also when the body begins to speak. A dull ache in the shoulders from hours of work, scratches hidden beneath clothing, the sting of smoke in the lungs. Survival often meant pushing through pain, but here in the hush of the evening, the aches are undeniable. Some women rub oil into their arms or feet. Small acts of care passed down from mothers or fellow workers. The gestures are simple, yet they carry centuries of wisdom, reminders that even within hardship, the body deserves to be honored. For a few, there is comfort in ritual. A whispered prayer to Venus, goddess of love and survival, or to Fortuna, whose wheel turns unpredictably. Offerings are impossible. Coins belong to brothel keeper, but words cost nothing. To pray, even quietly, is to believe that tomorrow might be different, or at least bearable. And then there are those who dream. In this city of marble and empire, dreams are often as vital as bread. A woman might imagine herself free, perhaps serving wine in a tavern instead of here, or sewing garments in a workshop. Another might think of her children, send her relatives in the countryside, and hold on to the hope that her work here buys them a better chance at life. Dreams in a brothel are rarely spoken aloud, but they exist nonetheless, fragile, shimmering, tucked between exhaustion and resolve. Yet the truth remains. This pause is temporary. Work may call again before dawn. The brothel is a place where night and day blur, where time bends the needs of customers rather than the bodies of those who serve them. The women know this, and so they guard the in-between with quiet intensity. To laugh, to share bread, to whisper a prayer, to dream, these are not luxuries. They are strategies of survival, just as real as earning coins. If you listen carefully, the brothel at this hour does not sound like commerce. It sounds like breathing, slow, steady, determined, beneath the weight of stigma, beneath the endless repetition of labor. There is a human rhythm that refuses to vanish. Between work and rest lies the proof that these women were not shadows or objects, but people, resilient, tender, enduring. And when the lamps are finally snuffed out, when the last murmurs fade, the silence of the brothel becomes almost sacred. For a few brief hours. It is not a marketplace, not a stage, but a shelter where weary bodies collapse to a fragile embrace of rest. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. But tonight, between work and rest, there is this moment. And for many, that is enough to keep going. The night's work. Night in Rome is never truly silent. The streets hum with echoes of tavern songs, the clatter of sandals against stone, and the distant creak of wagons heading toward the markets. But inside the brothel, as darkness deepens, the rhythm shifts again. The day has been long, the twilight paws fragile, and now comes a final stretch, the night's work. For some women, night is the hardest part. Customers who arrive after sundown are often drunk, their tempers quick, their laughter sharp-edged. They stumble in from the taverns nearby, pockets lighter from dice games or wine, and what coins remain are spent here. These men are louder, less patient, sometimes cruel. To serve them requires a different kind of endurance, one that relies not only on the body but on quick wit, calculated charm, or, when needed, silence. The Leno, the brothel keeper, is rarely far. He lingers in the shadows of the hall, listening for raised voices or broken deals. His presence is both a warning and a reminder. The women's labor is not entirely their own. Their earnings flow upward, leaving them with little more than scraps. Yet even under his watchful eye, they carve out small choices, which smile to use, which gesture might shorten the encounter, which words can redirect a man's temper before it flares. Night brings another reality. Exhaustion, bodies already strained from morning, and midday must continue to work. The muscles ache, the skin burns from oil and sweat, and yet the performance must go on. In this dim-lit world, fatigue cannot show. A customer wants laughter, warmth, an illusion of intimacy. And so, women become actresses in roles written by survival itself. Not every encounter is harsh. Some men come seeking comfort more than passion. A soldier weary from the field, a merchant far from home, a widower craving human closeness. They too arrive at night, often speaking more than touching. For a few coins, they share their worries, their grief, their longing, and in these moments the women listen. It is a strange intimacy, fragile and fleeting, but real enough to remind them that even here, human connection sometimes survives a transaction. There is also danger. Night lowers inhibitions, and with it comes risk. A man might refuse to pay, or lash out in anger. Rome's laws nominally protected prostitutes, but justice was rarely swift or fair. In these hours, the women rely on each other. A cry through the thin walls, a hurried knock on the door, signals that summon help or at least witnesses. In a world where their voices carried little weight, solidarity was often the only shield they had. Outside, the city sleeps fitfully. Fires burn in braziers, keeping watch against thieves. Dogs bark in the alleys. And within the brothel, the cycle turns quietly, one encounter after another. Time is measured not by hours, but by footsteps in the hall, by the creak of the door, by the sound of coins dropped into a box. And then, slowly, the night wanes. The drunkest customers drift away, stumbling back into the labyrinth of streets. The Leno counts his earnings, grumbling or satisfied depending on the tally. Lamps are snuffed out one by one, plunging the corridors into shadow. The women retreat to their narrow rooms, worn thin by the weight of labor, voices hoarse, bodies aching. In these final hours before dawn, sleep is less rest and escape. Some collapse immediately, surrendering to exhaustion. Others lie awake, eyes tracing the dark outlines of the ceiling, minds already wandering toward tomorrow. What will the day bring? Will there be kinder customers, or harsher ones? Will they find a way to save enough coin to buy freedom? Or will another year slip by in this cycle of service and survival? The night's work ends not with triumph, but with endurance. It is about lasting until the lamps are out, until silence finally returns, until the body can rest at least for a little while. And yet, within that endurance lies something powerful. Resilience. Every night survived is proof of strength, of stubborn persistence in a world that offered little kindness. As dawn begins to creep over the rooftops of Rome, the brothel falls quiet. What remains is not just fatigue, but the faint, stubborn heartbeat of survival. And tomorrow, when footsteps echo once more in the halls, when doors open and the cycle begins again, the women will rise. Because they must. Because even in the harshest hours of night, life continues. Closing reflection. And so, as the lamps are snuffed out in the brothel and the women drift into uneasy sleep, we step back for a moment. Their story is not only about desire and survival. It is about what it means to live the edges of a great empire, in spaces history rarely records but which pulse with human struggle all the same. When we imagine Rome, we often picture marble temples, grand arenas, or the voices of senators echoing in stone halls. But beneath those gleaming images were lives that unfolded in shadows. Women waking in cramped rooms, Men stumbling through darkened streets, coins exchanged for company, endurance traded for survival. It was as much a part of Rome as the Colosseum itself, a reminder that civilizations are not built only on monuments, but on countless daily labors, some celebrated, others ignored. And maybe, as we let that thought settle, there is something more here. The women of Rome's brothels lived in cycles of repetition, morning, midday, night, and then again. But in their endurance, there was a quiet resilience, proof that even in the most limited of circumstances, the human spirit finds ways to continue. History is filled with moments like this. Ordinary people bearing extraordinary burdens, their strength invisible yet essential. Sometimes it is a stoneworker shaping a cathedral block, sometimes a soldier holding a wall, sometimes a baker feeding a town, and sometimes it is the woman behind a narrow brothel door, surviving one night at a time. But survival is never guaranteed. Just as Rome had its hidden lives, it also had its hidden catastrophes. Times when the very air seemed to turn against the people, when sunlight itself dimmed and hunger replaced routine. That brings us to another chapter of history, one that shook not just a single city, but the entire world. A year that some historians call the darkest in all of human memory. The year 536, when the skies grew cold, the harvest failed, and life itself became a struggle against the shadows. Let's step into that moment together. Year 536 was the worst year to be alive. Settle in for a moment. Let the room grow quiet. Imagine you're living more than 1,500 years ago, in a time when the world itself seemed to lose its light. It is the year 536. You step outside one morning expecting the warmth of summer, but instead the air feels cold. The sky above is pale and dim, the sun so faint it looks more like the moon. For day after day, month after month, the world remains caught in this strange half-light. People across distant lands notice it too. In Byzantium, a historian named Procopius writes that the sun shone without brightness like the moon. In Ireland, the harvest fails. In China, snow falls in the middle of summer. Wherever you go, there are whispers. Has the world been cursed? Is this the end of time? Today, we know that great volcanoes had erupted, filling the atmosphere with fine ash that drifted across the earth. It scattered the sun's rays and cooled the land. But to the people of the 6th century, there was no science to explain it, only fear. Picture yourself as a farmer in a small village. June should bring green fields and the promise of bread. But the ground is frosted, the plants stunted. At night, your family huddles close, the fire weak, your children asking when food will return. You look to the sky, but the sky gives no answers. Or imagine a quiet monastery, where monks rise before dawn to chant. The light that enters the chapel windows is dim and gray. Their voices echo against stone walls as they pray harder than ever, believing that heaven itself is turned away. Far across the world, in the courts of China, officials write of yellow dust in the air and a famine spreading through the land. Snowflakes drift in summer winds, unsettling everyone who sees them. The emperor's advisors wonder aloud, what omen does this bring? Hunger follows quickly, crops wither, and for years people struggle to find enough to eat. In some places, whole families leave their homes searching for food, only to find other villages suffering the same. And just when hope feels thin, another shadow arrives. In 541, a terrible plague sweeps across the Byzantine Empire, carrying away countless lives. Imagine the weight of it. First the dimming of the sun, then the emptiness of the fields, and finally, the silence of homes where voices once laughed. And yet people endured. Even in the cold, they planted seeds, hoping some would grow. Even in hunger, they shared what little they had. They prayed. They buried their dead. They sang lullabies to children who cried themselves to sleep. When we look back now, with science and history at our side, we can see what they could not, that the haze in the sky was dust and that it would one day pass. But what matters most is that through that long twilight, people held on. Their survival is the reason we are here. So as you listen tonight, picture that dim and quiet year, the pale sun, the frosted fields, the voices whispering in the night. And let it remind you, even in the darkest seasons, human beings have always found a way to keep going. The worst year to be alive did not end the story. It only became another thread, woven into the long fabric of our shared history. And in that thought, there's a kind of comfort, a reminder that light always returns. The Gothic cathedral boom, 12th to 16th centuries. The centuries passed. The world slowly healed from its long twilight, and with time, new dreams began to take shape. Out of fear and famine, hope began to rise. And in Europe, the hope found its voice in stone and glass, in spires that reached toward the heavens. This was the age of the Gothic cathedrals. Imagine yourself walking through a medieval town in the 12th century. The streets are narrow, lined with wooden houses, the air filled with the smell of hearth smoke and the chatter of merchants. But at the end of the lane, something enormous rises above it all, a cathedral. Its towers are higher than anything you have ever seen, so tall they seem to touch the clouds. Its windows shimmer with colors you didn't know glass could hold. Reds like embers, blues like twilight, greens that glow like spring leaves after rain. When the sun moves, the light inside the church changes too, casting patterns across the stone floor, like ripples of water. To step inside is to step into another world. The ceilings stretch impossibly high, ribbed with arches that meet like the branches of a great tree. Candles flicker at the altar, and the voices of monks chanting echo far above, rising into the vaulted dome as if carried to heaven itself. But cathedrals were not built in a day. They took decades, sometimes centuries, to complete. Generations worked on them, fathers and sons carving stone side by side, never knowing if they would live to see the cathedral finished. Picture a mason, his hands rough from the chisel, standing on scaffolding as high as the rooftops. He leans back for a moment, gazing up at the spire that will one day pierce the sky. His work is slow, often dangerous, but he knows it is part of something greater than himself. When the bells of the church ring across the town, he hears not just sound, but purpose. And beneath those bells, ordinary people gathered. Farmers and merchants, nobles and beggars, all share the same sacred space. The cathedral was not only a house of worship, it was the heart of the community. It was where weddings were blessed, where the poor received charity, where festivals lit up the cold winter nights. In a world of hardship and uncertainty, the cathedral stood as a symbol of permanence, a promise that faith and beauty could outlast suffering. What is most striking is the direction of it all. After centuries of fear, the dark skies of 536, the plagues, the wars, human hands began building upward toward light. Stone by stone, they lifted their cities higher, as if to remind themselves that hope is not bound to the earth, but rises. Even now, centuries later, those cathedrals remain. Some lean slightly, some bear scars of time, but many still stand tall, their stained glass glowing in the morning sun. To walk through them today is to hear the echoes of 1,000 prayers, whispered over hundreds of years. And so, when you imagine the Gothic cathedral boom, let it be not just a story of architecture, but of spirit, a reminder that from the darkest winters, people chose to create light. They carved into stone, they painted into glass, they raised it above their heads until their dreams touched the sky. As you drift tonight, think of those spires, silent, steady, rising out of the mist. They are the dreams of a people who believed that no shadow could last forever. The Siege of Acre, 1291. And yet, history is never only about rising light. Alongside cathedrals and colored glass, there were also shadows, moments when faith and power clashed, when dreams of heaven were carried into war. One of those moments unfolded in the spring of 1291, in a city by the sea, Acre. Close your eyes and picture it. The Mediterranean waves brushing against the harbor walls. Narrow streets filled with spice sellers, pilgrims, and soldiers. Acre was the last stronghold of crusaders in the Holy Land, a place where east and west met in uneasy balance. Behind its stone walls lived people of many tongues, French, Arabic, Italian, Greek. Some prayed in churches, others in mosques, but all of them felt the tension that hung in the air. As the year turned, news spread. The Mamluk army was coming. Tens of thousands of soldiers, banners flying, drums echoing across the fields. They came not just to capture Acre, but to end Crusader presence in the East once and for all. Now imagine yourself as a soldier within the walls. At night, You lie awake in a canvas tent, the smell of sea salt mixing with the smoke of torches. From beyond the walls, you can hear faint sounds, the beat of enemy drums, the whisper of voices carried on the wind. Some men pray, clutching their rosaries. Others drink, trying to quiet their fear. Everyone knows the siege will not be easy. The assault begins with thunder. Stones launched by great catapults crash against the walls. Towers burn. The air is thick with dust and ash. Defenders scramble to pour water on flames, to push back ladders, to keep the enemy at bay. Day after day, the fighting continues, the city trembling under the weight of war. And yet, within the chaos, there are small, human moments. A mother gathers her children close in a cellar, singing softly to keep them calm. A monk moves quietly among the wounded, whispering prayers as he tends to their pain. A knight, weary and dust-covered, looks toward the sea, hoping for ships that may never come. By May, the walls begin to crack. The Mamluks pour in. Streets that once rang with merchants' calls now echo with the clash of steel and cries of the fallen. The Crusaders fight fiercely, but it is no use. One by one, the strongholds fall. Acre burns. For Europe, the loss is immense. With the fall of Acre, the age of the Crusader kingdoms comes to an end. There are no more footholds in the Holy Land, no more cities under cross. The dream that had driven generations to march east dissolves in smoke and ruin. But step back for a moment. Look beyond the banners and the battles. What happened in Acre was not just the end of a war. It was a reminder how fragile human power can be, and how quickly stone walls, no matter how strong, can crumble. The Siege of Acre is not a story meant to stir fear in the night. It is a story meant to remind us of cycles. Cities rise, walls fall, and through it all, human beings endure, singing, praying, hoping, even in the shadow of fire. So as you drift tonight, let the sounds of Acre fade in your mind. The distant waves, the low hum of drums, the murmur of voices in the dark. It was a place where an age ended and where another began. And like so many chapters of history, its echoes are still with us, gentle reminders of how deeply war and hope, loss and memory are woven into the human story. The life of Livia Drusilla, 58 BCE, 29 CE. From the smoke of Acre, let us travel further back, past the Crusades, past the cathedrals, even before the long shadow of 536. We return to ancient Rome, to marble halls and candlelit chambers, where whispers could be as powerful as armies. Here we meet a woman who lived not on the battlefield, but in the heart of empire. Her name was Livia Drusilla. Close your eyes and picture the world she was born into, 58 BC. The Republic was crumbling, torn apart by rival generals and endless civil wars. Streets that once echoed with the laughter of markets now shook with the march of legions. Amid this uncertainty, Livia grew up in a noble Roman household, taught to be poised, careful, always aware of the eyes upon her. She was married young, as many Roman women were, and soon became a mother, but fate had larger plans. For in the turbulence of Rome, she crossed paths with a man named Octavian, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar and the future Augustus, Rome's first emperor. They fell deeply, unexpectedly in love. But love in Rome was rarely simple. Both were already married, and their union would be a scandal. Yet Octavian divorced his wife. Livia's husband stepped aside, and in 38 BC, the two were wed. From then on, their lives and Rome's destiny were bound together. Now imagine her in the palace, moving quietly among senators and generals, her voice calm, her eyes steady. Livia was no ordinary Roman matron. She was sharp, disciplined, and always aware that power was fragile. Augustus trusted her completely, often seeking her counsel. Together, they shaped not only their household, but the empire itself. Some said she was cold, that she thought more like a statesman than a mother. Others whispered she was ruthless, even accused her of poisoning rivals to secure her son Tiberius' succession. Whether those rumors were true or the inventions of enemies, we cannot know. What we do know is that for more than 50 years, Livia remained at the very center of Roman power. And yet, beyond politics, there is something quieter to see. She managed vast estates, patronized the arts, and cared for the image of the imperial family. She understood the importance of appearances, that Rome needed not just an emperor, but a dynasty that looked stable, eternal. Picture her in later years, seated in a shaded garden. The empire stretches from Spain to Syria, from Egypt to the Rhine. Senators bow as they pass. Her servants wait at a distance, and her grandchildren play among the fountains. She has lived through wars, conspiracies, and betrayals, and still she sits in the heart of it all, calm, watchful, enduring. When Augustus died, it was Livia who carried his memory forward. She was named Augusta, honored as a mother of the empire, a woman whose quiet strength had helped guide Rome from chaos into order. What does her story tell us? Perhaps that power does not always roar on the battlefield. Sometimes it moves in silence, in whispered advice, in steady presence over decades. Livia's life reminds us that history is not only written by kings and generals, but also by those who stand beside them, patient, subtle, unshakable. And so, as you drift deeper into the night, let the marble halls fade into mist. Think of Livia, walking slowly through the palace gardens, her robes brushing softly against the stone. She is neither villain nor saint, but a reminder. Behind every throne, there is always a human heart, steady and enduring, shaping history in ways that are often unseen. Reflection, the threads that bind, the journey so far. Here we are at the quiet turning point of our journey. We've walked together through fragments of history, moments separated by centuries, yet connected by something deeper, almost invisible, like threads woven through a tapestry. We began in ancient Rome, in the shadowed rooms of women whose stories were rarely carved into marble or celebrated in triumphal arches. Their lives were fragile, ordinary in their hardship, and yet they endured. From their doorways, we learned not conquest or empire, but of resilience and survival. From there, the night carried us to the year 536, a year when the sun itself dimmed and the world seemed to slip into twilight. Harvest failed, hunger spread, and people whispered that the end had come. Imagine stepping outside and finding the summer sky gray, the air colder than it should be, the earth refusing to yield its grain. And yet, even in that darkness, people pressed forward. They clung to one another, to scraps of hope, to the simple will to live. Then we looked upward, into the vaulted ceilings of Gothic cathedrals. Rising out of towns still scarred by famine and fear, they were miracles of stone and glass. Imagine standing in the half-finished nave, hearing the strike of hammers, watching colored light spill across the floor. These cathedrals were not just buildings. They were prayers made solid, hope carved into stone, light captured in glass. But history holds not only beauty. At Acre in 1291, we stood among soldiers and citizens facing the end of an age. The clash of armies, the smoke of torches, the quiet dread before dawn. Acre was not only a battle, it was a closing chapter, a reminder of how devotion can inspire courage and also ignite conflict. And finally, we returned to Rome, not its streets this time, but its palaces, where Livia Drusilla walked in quiet power. She did not fight battles with sword or shield, but with patience, wisdom, and presence. She showed us that influence often hides in the spaces between words, in gestures unnoticed, in choices made far from the battlefield. So this is where we find ourselves tonight, at the edge of a vast mosaic of human experience. Women in shadows, farmers under gray skies, builders lifting stone toward the heavens, soldiers staring at a doomed horizon, a matron shaping an empire, different lives, different worlds. And yet, together, they remind us that history is not just kings and battles. It is struggle, endurance, and the quiet thread of hope that runs THR. Vulnerability of human life. When we pause and look back at these stories, one truth begins to shine through. How fragile human life has always been. No matter the century, no matter the empire, each life was lived against a backdrop of uncertainty. Think again of the women of ancient Rome. They woke each morning in dim chambers, never certain who would walk through their doors, never sure how their bodies, their dignity, their safety would survive another night. Their vulnerability was not only personal, it was woven into the structure of the city itself. Rome thrived on spectacle and conquest, yet within its walls, countless women lived day to day in quiet precarity. The people of 536 knew that same precarity, though on a different scale. They woke to skies that refused to brighten, to fields that refused to yield. Imagine stepping out into the chill of summer, your breath visible in the air, and knowing that the earth itself seemed to have turned against you. No matter your wealth or your station, the dim sun did not discriminate. Emperor or peasant, all stood beneath the same gray heavens, powerless before forces too vast to control. Even the builders of cathedrals, though they reached for light, worked within that fragility. Their lives were short, their bodies worn down by labor, their work stretching far beyond a single lifetime. Many chisels struck stone, knowing they would never see the final arch rise above them. They were vulnerable not only to hunger and sickness, but to time itself, time that demanded patience, endurance, and faith that others would carry their vision forward. And at Acre, we saw another face of vulnerability. Soldiers, citizens, and families caught between two tides of history. Walls that once seemed solid crumbled under siege. Supplies dwindled. Hopes grew thin. For those inside the city, no rank or prayer could shield them from the uncertainty of the coming dawn. The very air was heavy with the knowledge that everything familiar, their homes, their streets, their lives, might vanish in fire and blood. Even Livia Drusilla, with all her poise and influence, lived within a fragile balance. In the grandeur of Roman palaces, power was never secure. An emperor could fall to illness. A rival could rise overnight. The favor of the people could shift like the wind. Livia moved carefully because she had to. Her strength was born of awareness that power, like life itself, could vanish in an instant. Across these stories, separated by centuries, we find the same quiet refrain. Life has always been delicate. A missed harvest, a sudden illness, a whisper scandal, a shift of politics. Any one of these could change the course of a life, or even the fate of a kingdom. And yet, within that fragility lies something remarkable. Human beings did not surrender to it. They worked, they endured, they prayed, they built, they fought, they hoped. To live in the face of vulnerability is itself an act of courage. So, as we linger in this moment of reflection, perhaps we can allow that truth to settle softly, that every person who came before us, whether in Rome, in Acre, in Gothic towns, or beneath the pale sun of 536, lived with the same fragile thread of existence we carry now. And in recognizing their vulnerability, we also recognize our own. Humanity's search for light and meaning. If human life is fragile, then perhaps what has always given us strength is our search for light and meaning. It is not enough to simply endure the storm. People across centuries have reached for something beyond survival, something that could turn pain into purpose. Think again of the Roman prostitutes. Though their lives seemed to belong to the shadows, many sought ways to hold on to dignity, to carve out identity. Some adorned themselves with jewelry or perfume, fragile tokens that said, "I am more than what is taken from me." Even within walls where they were reduced to a transaction, they tried to reclaim a sense of self, however small. That search for meaning was an act of quiet defiance against a world that often denied it. In the year 536, when the sky dimmed and fields lay barren, people did not stop seeking reasons to hope. They prayed. They told stories of gods and saints, of omens and miracles. Even if explanations could not restore the sun, they could restore a sense of order in a world gone strange. To give meaning to the darkness was itself a way of surviving it. For when nothing outside made sense, people built sense within their hearts. The Gothic cathedrals shine brightest in this search. Rising from towns scarred by famine and plague, they were more than architecture. They were symbols of longing. Imagine standing before colored glass, sunlight breaking through in radiant reds and blues, and feeling that perhaps heaven itself was close enough to touch. These cathedrals said to every weary traveler and every laborer bent from toil, "There's more than hardship. There is beauty. There is light." Even those who could barely read could look upward and understand. And at Acre, in the tension of a city under siege, people still clung to meaning. Soldiers prayed in chapels. Mothers whispered lullabies to their children. Men and women alike searched for courage in the stories of saints and martyrs. Even as stone walls shook beneath bombardment, they carried symbols of faith, crosses, relics, scraps of scripture, small anchors of meaning in a sea of chaos. Livia Drusilla, too, is a figure of the same thread. Her power was not only in politics, but in shaping the story of Rome itself. By supporting Augustus, by weaving her influence quietly into the empire's future, she ensured that meaning outlasted any single reign. She showed that even in a world of shifting loyalties, one could give shape to the narrative of history itself. Across these centuries, we see that humans never stopped reaching for light, whether through ritual, through art, through buildings, or through the stories they told themselves at night. Fragility might be our condition, but meaning has always been our answer. And perhaps that is why, even now, we tell these stories before sleep. Because in them we find not only the weight of history, but also the comfort of knowing that those before us search for the same things we do, a sense that life matters, that hardship can be endured, and that somewhere, even in darkness, there is light to be found. Cycles of darkness and light. History often moves not in straight lines, but in circles, cycles of shadow and brightness, decline and renewal. When we trace the stories we've traveled tonight, that rhythm becomes clear, like the rise and fall of breath in a quiet room. In Rome's hidden quarters, life for prostitutes was marked by shadows, secrecy, stigma, survival in dim corners. Yet even there, flickers of light appeared, moments of laughter, fragment of friendship, small joys that pierce the gloom. Their days remind us that even in the most shadowed places, light finds a way to seep in, however faint. Then came the year 536, when the world itself seemed swallowed by night. Crops withered, skies dimmed, and hunger spread. It was a time when the cycle bent sharply toward darkness. And yet, the centuries that followed carried renewal. Fields grew green again, communities rebuilt, knowledge persisted. The earth remembered the light, even when humans feared it was gone forever. From that darkness rose cathedrals, monuments of light. They glowed with colored glass and lofty arches, standing as radiant counterpoints to centuries of plague and despair. But even within their beauty, shadows lingered. Construction was slow, workers were lost to illness or famine, and beneath the soaring stone, the poor still struggled. Yet the very existence of these cathedrals shows the cycle. Hardship births hope, darkness inspires light. The siege of Acre revealed another turn of the wheel. For decades, crusaders and locals alike had lived under banners of faith. But when the city fell, an era closed in fire and shadow. It was a dusk of sorts, a reminder that human devotion can lead not only to light, but also to flame. Still, even after Acre's fall, new stories began. Trade routes shifted, cultures mingled, and though blood marked the soil, the seeds of new beginnings were quietly sown. And in the life of Livia Drusilla, we see the cycle in miniature. She navigated the bright court of Augustus's Rome, where marbles shone and victories were celebrated. Yet beneath that brilliance lay constant threats, political intrigue, fragile alliances, the lurking shadow of mortality. Livia's careful balance between caution and influence was her way of moving through those cycles, guiding Rome through both stability and uncertainty. Darkness, then light, collapse, then rebuilding, silence, then song. These rhythms are as old as time itself, and they remind us that no shadow lasts forever, and no light is free of shadow. The two belong together, endlessly weaving in and out, shaping the fabric of history and of life. So as we sit with these stories, perhaps the comfort lies here. Our world too will always shift between hardship and hope, between trial and renewal, just as the ancients endured their cycles. So do we. The night may feel long, but morning always waits. The tapestry of history. When we step back from these stories, what we see is not a single thread, but a woven fabric, intricate, fragile, and strong. Each life, each moment, is a strand of color, and together they form the great tapestry of history. The women of Rome, often unseen, add the muted hues of endurance and survival. Their quiet lives may never have been etched in stone, but without them, the fabric will be incomplete. Their struggles are the dark threads that give depth to the brighter ones. The shadowed year 536 casts its deep, gray tones across the weave. It was a bleak passage, a reminder that nature itself can dim the world. Yet even that darkness has its place, because it makes the return of light all the more radiant. The Gothic cathedrals rise within the tapestry as vivid, shimmering patterns of blue and gold. They are the bright stitches that catch the eye, offering balance to the darker strands. They remind us that even when life is harsh, humanity can create beauty that endures beyond centuries. The siege of Acre adds a fiery reds, the jagged edges of conflict. These are the places in the tapestry where the weave feels rough to the touch, where history's violence leaves scars. And yet, even here, the pattern continues, threads carrying forward into new designs, new beginnings. And woven through it all is Livia Drusilla, her presence subtle but steady, like a fine silver thread that holds the fabric together. She reminds us that not all power shouts. Some shapes history with a quiet hand, with patience and foresight that endure long after the noise of battle fades. Together, these threads reveal something profound. History is not simply a record of events, but a living fabric made from both suffering and hope, both loss and creation. It is messy and beautiful, fragile and resilient, just as we are. And perhaps, as we look at this tapestry under the gentle light of night, we realize that we too are part of it. Our own joys, fears, and choices are threads being woven right now, in the patterns that those who come after us may pause to trace. So, as the night deepens and our journey through history winds down, let's carry this image with us. A vast, endless weave, filled with shadow and with light, where every life matters, every story counts. And perhaps, in that thought, we can find comfort enough to rest. And now, as our journey draws to a close, the night feels quieter, softer, as though it too has been listening. We've walked together through shadows and light, through the hidden corners of Rome, the gray skies of 536, the soaring arches of Gothic cathedrals, the firelit walls of Acre, and the still presence of Livia Drusilla. Each story has left a trace upon us, like footsteps fading into sand. Perhaps what lingers most is not the details, but the feeling that human life, fragile though it may be, has always reached for meaning, that in every century, people long for comfort, for beauty, for survival, for love. And in their longing, they created the very history we now look back on. So if you are still awake with me, listening in the quiet of your room, let these stories settle gently. Allow them to loosen the worries of the day, to remind you that your own place in this tapestry is just as precious. You are part of the same human rhythm, sometimes shadowed, sometimes bright, always moving, always weaving. Close your eyes and let the images drift like dreams. A lantern glowing in a Roman street, a sun dimmed by ash, a shard of colored glass catching light, a soldier whispering a final prayer, a woman's voice steady in the hush of a palace hall. They are distant, yet strangely near, as if whispering across time, telling you are not alone in your struggles, your hopes, your search for peace. And if tonight you found comfort here, I invite you to return for the next story in our series. More voices from history, told softly, slowly, to guide you once again toward rest. Subscribe if you like, but only if it feels right, and let me know where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to imagine the tapestry stretching wider, threads of stories and voices connected across oceans. For now, let us leave the past to its quiet rest and allow ourselves to do the same. May the flicker of these tales carry you gently into sleep. Good night.